The quantum drive hummed with an unexpected resonance, a sound that was more feeling than noise. Lieutenant Area Chin gripped the control interface, her augmented neural link flickering with warning signals that made no sense, even to her. United Earth experimental vessel Hermes was never supposed to be here. Here, being the most heavily monitored sector of Vorax-controlled space, a region so meticulously patrolled that most species didn't even dream of attempting passage. The ship's experimental quantum stealth drive was a desperate moonshot, a last-ditch effort by humanity's most marginalized research division to prove their worth. Chen knew the stakes. Humanity had become the galactic equivalent of a forgotten backwater, relegated to the absolute periphery of interstellar politics. Earth's colonies were barely tolerated, their technological contributions minimal, their diplomatic presence nearly non-existent. This mission was their Hail Mary, a single chance to demonstrate that humans were more than just another subjugated species waiting for eventual extinction. The drive's prototype was cobbled together from theoretical mathematics that most scientific boards had declared impossible. Dr. Rajesh Mehta, the lead engineer, had been laughed out of 3 research conferences. His quantum entanglement theory suggested that a properly configured drive could not just bend spacetime, but potentially slip through microscopic quantum tunnels that existed between observable spacetime. Nobody believed him. Nobody except Area Chen. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, watching impossible data stream past. The ship's quantum signature was flickering. No, that wasn't right. It was doing something that defied every known law of quantum mechanics. Where most navigation systems would show a clear position, Chen's display looked more like a probability cloud, the Hermes existing simultaneously in multiple potential locations. "Command, are you seeing this?" she subvocalized through her neural link. Silence. The communication array was dead. Or worse, they were somewhere communication was impossible. A sudden burst of energy cascaded through the ship's systems. The hull temperature dropped precipitously, then spiked. Warning indicators flashed crimson, then winked out entirely. For a moment, absolute darkness consumed the bridge. When the lights returned, Lieutenant Chen realized they were no longer where they were supposed to be. Vorax long-range sensors were the most advanced in the known galaxy. A single unauthorized quantum signature would trigger planet-wide defense protocols. Entire civilizations had been wiped from existence for far less. And yet here was the Hermes, impossibly, unbelievably, right in the heart of the Vorax Empire. The first detection would come in moments. Chen knew their survival depended on those moments. The quantum drive had brought them here through some miracle of physics. Now they would need something equally miraculous to survive. Her hand hovered over the primary weapon system. It was laughably inadequate against a Vorax destroyer. But humans had never been good at accepting impossible odds. Something unexpected was about to happen, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Vorax destroyer materialized like a nightmare of steel and radiation. Its hull was a masterpiece of weaponized geometry, sharp angles converging into a predatory silhouette that had crushed 1,000 civilizations without mercy. Senior Sensor Coordinator Vexera knew every millimeter of standard engagement protocols. This would be another routine elimination. Unidentified vessel. Vexera's translation implant clicked with clinical precision. "You have entered restricted space. Prepare for immediate neutralization." Inside the Hermes, Lieutenant Chen's neural link blazed with a cascade of impossible calculations. The quantum drive wasn't just a propulsion system. It was something more, something the Vorax couldn't possibly comprehend. Her crew, a mix of humanity's most brilliant misfits, moved with a synchronicity that defied traditional military training. Miguel Rodriguez, the systems engineer, was already reconfiguring quantum entanglement matrices. Dr. Elena Kowalski, their physicist, ran her fingers across holographic displays that seemed to breathe with living data. The Vorax weapon systems charged. A standard engagement would be over in microseconds. Their particle disruptors could reduce a ship to plasma before most species could even recognize the threat. But the Hermes was not most ships. Quantum resonance at 78%, Rodriguez called out. His voice held none of the terror a rational being should feel when facing certain destruction. Chen's lips curved into something between a smile and a war cry. Hold tight. The first Vorax energy pulse, a weapon that had annihilated entire planetary defense grids, struck where the Herms should have been. Instead, the human vessel seemed to shift, not dodge, not move, something else entirely. Vexera's sensor displays erupted in cascading error messages. Impossible readings flickered and died. The unidentified vessel didn't just survive the attack. It appeared to absorb and redistribute the energy in ways that violated every known principle of physics. Recalibrating. The Vorax system's artificial intelligence intoned, a hint of confusion breaking its usual clinical tone. Inside the Herms, Shen understood something profound was happening. The quantum drive wasn't just a propulsion system. It was a living mathematical entity. Each attack didn't just slide off their shields. It was being transformed, understood, and potentially weaponized. Rodriguez let out a laugh that was half hysteria, half triumph. Energy conversion at 62%. We're not just surviving. We're learning. The Vorax destroyer fired again. And again. Each burst of destructive energy became something else when it touched the Herms. Probability itself seemed to bend around the human vessel. Vexera's hands, appendages evolved for precise technological manipulation, trembled. In centuries of warfare, the Vorax had never encountered a vessel that didn't follow the fundamental rules of combat. This human ship didn't just break rules, it seemed to be writing entirely new ones. Quantum resonance stabilizing. Kowalski announced, "We're no longer just defending. We're communicating." Communication, not through language, but through the fundamental mathematics of energy and spacetime. The Herms was talking to the universe in a dialect no one had ever heard before. The Vorax destroyer systems began to falter, not from weapon damage, from something more profound, a fundamental challenge to everything they understood about warfare, technology, existence itself. Lieutenant Chen gripped her command interface. First contact wasn't just happening. It was being rewritten with each passing microsecond. Something extraordinary was emerging. And the galaxy would never be the same. The data arrived like a bomb. United Earth Research Command's most secure facility, a fortified complex buried beneath the Andes Mountains, erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Rajesh Mehta stood motionless, his dark eyes consuming the impossible telemetry from the Herms. Around him, a dozen of humanity's top researchers moved with a frenetic energy that bordered on religious revelation. "This isn't just a breakthrough," Mehta muttered, his fingers tracing holographic data streams that danced with impossible geometries. "This is a complete reconstruction of fundamental physics." The quantum drive's data package was more than just technical information. It was a Rosetta Stone of physics, revealing layers of scientific understanding that humanity had only dreamed about. Each millisecond of recorded data seemed to breathe with potential, challenging every established theory of quantum mechanics, energy transfer, and spatial dynamics. Dr. Elena Santos, the lead quantum systems analyst, let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Do you understand what this means? The energy conversion rates alone. We're looking at a technology that doesn't just bend the rules of physics. It negotiates with them." Mehta knew the stakes. Humanity had been the galactic equivalent of a technological charity case, barely tolerated, constantly overlooked. Research funding was a constant battle, with most of their proposals dismissed before they even reached review boards. The major galactic research consortiums saw humans as nothing more than primitive collectors of scraps. Not anymore. The Herms's quantum drive data was a declaration of war, not a military conflict, but an intellectual revolution. Every major research institution would be scrambling to understand what had just happened. The Vorax, who had long considered themselves the pinnacle of technological achievement, were about to discover that true innovation comes from unexpected places. "We need to recreate this," Santos said, her voice a mixture of determination and barely contained excitement. Every single variable, every quantum fluctuation. Meta nodded. The recreation wouldn't be easy. The data suggested that the quantum drive wasn't just a piece of technology. It was almost a living system. Its response to the Vorax destroyer's attacks had been adaptive, learning, transforming in ways that defied traditional engineering concepts. Meanwhile, in orbit around a classified research station, a team of engineers began the impossible task of translating the Hermes's data. Each line of code was a potential revolution. Each quantum signature was a challenge to everything humanity thought it knew about space travel, energy manipulation, and the fundamental nature of reality. The research team worked in shifts that blended into each other, fueled by synthetic caffeine and the kind of pure scientific passion that transforms civilizations. They weren't just analyzing data. They were midwifing humanity's technological rebirth. Lieutenant Aria Chin and her crew aboard the Hermes became inadvertent prophets. Their accidental journey wasn't just a military mission anymore. It was a scientific paradigm shift that would echo through generations. Dr. Santos looked up from her workstation, her eyes reflecting the cascading holographic data. "This isn't just a technological breakthrough," she said quietly. "This is humanity's declaration to the galaxy." Meta allowed himself a rare smile. The universe was about to get a harsh lesson in human potential, and it would never see them coming. In the dark corners of 1,000 subjugated worlds, hope began to flicker like a forbidden flame. The story spread through underground communication networks, whispers at first, then shouts. A human ship. Impossible. Defiant. Surviving where every other species had been crushed beneath the Vorax heel. Each retelling added layers of myth, but the core remained true. Somewhere out there, someone had stood against the impossible and survived. On the mining colony of Rix 9, a Krell resistance worker named Zara listened to the transmission for the 100th time. Her exoskeleton, designed for generations of brutal labor, carried scars of Vorax oppression. Her people had been strip mining resources for 3 centuries, their entire civilization reduced to living tools. "Listen," she told a group of young Krell gathered in a hidden cavern. The transmission crackled, a recording of the human ship's impossible encounter with a Vorax destroyer. It wasn't just a technical marvel. It was a message. Some worlds away, on the agricultural planet Verdun 3, a Taurian communication specialist named Kell decoded the transmission with trembling appendages. The Taurians had been genetic engineers for the Vorax, their entire species used to develop biological technologies. Generations of scientific brilliance had been reduced to corporate slavery. The human transmission carried more than data. It carried possibility. In the research archives of a dozen subjugated civilizations, scientists began to compare notes. The quantum drive data from the human ship wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a skeleton key to understanding technologies the Vorax had deliberately suppressed. The Vorax knew, and they were terrified. Internal communications intercepted by resistance networks revealed the truth. The human encounter wasn't just a military anomaly. It was a fundamental challenge to the Vorax's entire system of galactic control. Zara began to organize, not with weapons, not yet, with information, with hope. On 3 different planets, resistance cells that had been dormant for generations began to activate. They shared nothing in common except a newfound belief that resistance was possible. The human ship became a symbol, proof that the universe didn't belong to the Vorax. Deep in the Vorax Central Intelligence Network, an AI designed to track and suppress potential resistance began to show the first signs of systemic stress. Probability matrices that had been stable for centuries suddenly became unpredictable. Something was changing. The Krell began to modify their mining equipment. The Taurians rediscovered suppressed scientific journals. Genetic records long thought destroyed began to resurface. Kell, the Taurian communication specialist, understood first. This wasn't just about technology. This was about remembering who they were before the Vorax broke them. "We were not always slaves. he told a gathering of resistance members. And we will not remain slaves. The quantum drive of a single human ship had done what centuries of armed rebellion could not. It had given hope a quantum state of its own, simultaneously impossible and inevitable. The rebellion wasn't coming. The rebellion had already begun. The first battle was nothing like anyone expected. 417 species watched as the combined resistance fleet emerged from quantum tunnels, a flotilla cobbled together from stolen parts, modified mining equipment, and pure desperation. At its heart, the United Earth experimental vessel Hermes looked almost absurdly small. Lieutenant Area Chen's voice cut through the communication network. "This isn't about victory," she said. "This is about possibility." The Vorax defense grid was a marvel of technological supremacy. Generations of conquered civilizations had contributed to its construction, a massive network of weapon platforms that could obliterate entire planetary systems with a thought. Millions of precise weapon systems locked onto the incoming fleet, calculations of destruction already computed. But something was different. The resistance ships moved with an organic unpredictability that defied every known combat algorithm. Where traditional fleet tactics would create clean, geometric battle formations, this fleet looked like a living organism. Ships from different species, each with wildly different technological bases, moved in a synchronicity that should have been impossible. A Krell mining vessel, its hull reinforced with generations of adaptive metallurgy, suddenly interfaced with a Taurian bioorganic support ship. The connection happened outside of any known communication protocol. It was less a technological link and more a conversation. The Vorax weapon systems began to falter. Each targeting solution collapsed millisecond after it was calculated. Ships appeared and disappeared not through traditional stealth technology, but through something far more fundamental. They weren't just avoiding weapons, they were rewriting the very physics of engagement. Quantum resonance stabilizing. Miguel Rodriguez called from the Hermes's bridge. "We're creating a collective field." What the Resistance had discovered, what the Hermes had first demonstrated, was that technology was more than hardware. It was a language, a negotiation with the universe itself. The first Vorax defense platform exploded not from a weapon strike, but from an internal cascade of computational impossibility. Its own systems couldn't reconcile the data being presented. Zara, the Krell resistance leader, watched from a modified observation ship. Her exoskeleton interfaced directly with the ship's systems, feeling every quantum fluctuation. "We are not just fighting," she transmitted. "We are becoming something new." Entire weapon platforms went dark. Not destroyed. Transformed. The battle wasn't about destruction. It was about communication, about rewriting the fundamental rules of engagement. Lieutenant Chen understood something profound in that moment. Humanity's greatest contribution wasn't going to be a weapon. It was going to be a new way of understanding conflict itself. "We're not conquering," she said quietly. "We're teaching." The resistance fleet moved like a living thought through the Vorax defense grid. Each moment was an argument. Each ship a sentence in a language of pure potential. And the galaxy watched, understanding that everything was about to change. The Vorax Central Governance Complex was a monument to absolute control, a massive orbital construct that had remained unchanged for 7 centuries. Its architecture spoke of permanence, of an empire so confident in its supremacy that adaptation was considered a weakness. That was about to change. High Coordinator Vornak stared at the cascading system's failure with a mixture of disbelief and mounting terror. The Resistance wasn't just fighting. They were fundamentally rewriting the rules of engagement, of existence itself. Intelligence reports streamed in from across the galaxy. Worlds once considered completely subjugated were showing signs of unprecedented resistance. The Krell mining colonies had transformed their extraction equipment into defense systems. Taurian research facilities were producing technologies that defied every known scientific paradigm. And at the center of it all, a single human vessel. The Hermes had become more than a ship. It was a symbol, a technological Rosetta Stone that was teaching subjugated species something fundamental about resistance, about potential. Analyze. Vornak commanded the central AI. The response was unprecedented. Unable to compute, the AI responded. Existing models of conflict, control, and technological progression are no longer applicable. 417 species were no longer just resisting. They were becoming something entirely new. The resistance wasn't a military campaign. It was a collective awakening. Lieutenant Arya Chen understood the deeper truth. This wasn't about defeating the Voraks. It was about demonstrating a fundamentally different way of existing. On the bridge of the Herms, her team worked with a synchronicity that defied traditional military training. Dr. Elena Kowalski manipulated quantum matrices that seemed to breathe with living data. Miguel Rodriguez integrated technologies from a dozen different species in ways that should have been impossible. Zara, the Krell resistance leader, transmitted a message that spread across 1,000 communication networks. We are not who you told us we were. The Voraks had built an empire on a simple premise. That control was the ultimate expression of civilization. They had systematically suppressed innovation, creativity, individual potential. Each conquered species was reduced to a function, a resource to be exploited. Now, those species were remembering who they could be. Entire planetary defense systems began to shift, not through weapon upgrades, but through a fundamental reimagining of their purpose. Mining equipment became communication networks. Agricultural systems became adaptive learning platforms. Vornak watched as centuries of carefully constructed control began to dissolve. "This is impossible," he whispered. But possibility had never been about what was possible. It was about what could be imagined. The human ship, this impossible vessel that had started everything, moved through the galaxy like a living idea. Each quantum fluctuation was a challenge. Each moment of contact was a negotiation. The Voraks had ruled through fear, through the systematic elimination of potential. The resistance was writing a new story. And the galaxy was listening. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It was a conversation. Vornak stood in the central chamber of the Voraks High Council, his carapace trembling with a sensation the Voraks had never experienced. Uncertainty. Around him, the most powerful leaders of the Empire looked less like conquerors and more like survivors. "We cannot continue." Council member Zelra spoke first, her voice a mixture of clinical analysis and something deeper. The existing model of control has become unsustainable. The holographic displays told a story of complete systemic collapse. Worlds that had been perfect models of subjugation were now centers of unprecedented innovation. The Krell, once reduced to nothing more than mining drones, had developed quantum communication technologies that made Vorak systems look primitive. The Taurian biological research networks had become living, adaptive systems that defied every known principle of technological development. And at the center of it all, the human vessel Hermes continued its impossible journey. Lieutenant Arya Chen knew this moment was about more than victory. This was about transformation. "We're not here to destroy you," she transmitted to the Voraks Council. "We're here to show you another way of existing." The transmission carried more than words. It was a quantum signature that spoke of potential, of possibility. Each word was a mathematical argument, each pause a potential for understanding. Zara, the Krell resistance leader, appeared on secondary communication channels. Her exoskeleton, once a symbol of oppression, now bristled with adaptive technologies that merged biological potential with quantum computing. "We were never your resources," she said. "We are potential waiting to be understood." The resistance fleet wasn't a military formation. It was a living network of possibility. Ships from 417 species moved with a synchronicity that defied traditional understanding of collective action. Each vessel was both an individual and part of a greater whole, a living metaphor for the transformation happening across the galaxy. Vornak understood something profound in that moment. The Voraks hadn't just been conquering species, they had been limiting potential, suppressing the fundamental creativity that drove evolution. The human approach was fundamentally different. Not conquest, not control, but communication, a constant negotiation with the possible. "We surrender," Vornak transmitted. But it wasn't a surrender of defeat, it was a surrender to possibility. Dr. Elena Kowalski from the Herms' research team analyzed the transmission. "It's not just a communication," she told Chen. "It's a fundamental reset of galactic understanding." The quantum drive that had started everything continued to pulse, not as a weapon, not as a tool of conquest, but as a beacon of something entirely new. The Vorax Empire was ending, but something else was beginning. A civilization of potential was about to emerge. 50 years after the quantum drive of the Herms first flickered on Vorax scanners, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. The Collaborative Potential Network, as the new galactic civilization called itself, was nothing like the empires that had come before. It wasn't a government. It wasn't an alliance. It was a living, breathing system of collective innovation. Lieutenant Area Chen, now Chief Coordinator of Interdimensional Research, looked out over the central research hub. Her body had been extended through quantum biomechanical interfaces, a testament to the technological leaps that had transformed every aspect of existence. Around her, representatives from 417 species worked in a harmony that would have been impossible just decades earlier. "We're not done," she said to the assembled researchers. "We're just beginning." The transformation had been total. Worlds once strip-mined were now centers of unprecedented ecological and technological regeneration. The Krell had developed planetary restoration technologies that could heal entire ecosystems in decades instead of millennia. Taurian biological research had created adaptive medical systems that could respond to any potential health challenge across species lines. Zara, the former resistance leader, now led the collective's Adaptive Potential Initiative. Her work bridged biological, technological, and philosophical boundaries. Each breakthrough was a conversation, not a conquest. The quantum drive that had started everything was no longer just a technology. It had become a philosophical framework, a way of understanding existence as a constant negotiation of potential. Vornak, the former Vorax High Coordinator, worked alongside human and alien researchers. The species that had once been the galaxy's ultimate oppressors now dedicated themselves to understanding the fundamental nature of collective potential. "We were wrong," Vornak would often say. "Control is the enemy of evolution." The Herms, now a living museum and research vessel, continued to travel the galaxy, not as a weapon, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a reminder of how everything began. Educational systems across the galaxy had been completely transformed. Learning was no longer about memorization, but about potential, about asking questions that hadn't been asked before, about understanding that every individual, regardless of species, carried the capacity for unprecedented innovation. Dr. Elena Kowalski's quantum communication networks allowed instantaneous understanding across previously insurmountable biological and technological barriers. A Krell miner could share a moment of scientific insight with a Taurian researcher as easily as breathing. It wasn't a utopia. There were still challenges, still conflicts, but they were approached as opportunities for growth, not as threats to be eliminated. Miguel Rodriguez, the original engineer from the Herms, often spoke to young researchers about the moment everything changed. "We didn't win a war," he would say. "We discovered a new way of being." The galaxy had learned something profound. Potential was not a limited resource to be controlled. It was an infinite landscape of possibility, waiting to be explored. And they were just getting started.